The scalpel froze a millimeter from the child's heart. Dr. Lena Adebio knew every scar, every birthmark on the son stolen from her 4 years ago. And the man who just delivered this critical patient to her sole operating room was the same one who'd ordered the kidnapping, a mafia boss who'd turned her child into a transaction in South Korea's brutal, hidden adoption supply chain. This is the story of a system. Between the 1950s and 1980s, over 200,000 Korean children were sent to adoptive parents overseas, with many supplied not from orphanages, but from a shadow network of kidnappers, corrupt agencies, and falsified paperwork. How did a government-sanctioned adoption pipeline become a trafficking operation? And what happens when one mother, armed only with a surgeon's memory, discovers her child was one of its most valuable commodities? To understand the collision in that operating room, you must first understand the two forces that created it. 1. A grieving mother's relentless search. And 2. A nation's calculated, decades-long project to supply children to the West. Lena Adebio's son, Kofi, was taken from a park in Accra 4 years ago. She was a visiting medical fellow. He was 2. The police report went nowhere. Interpol hits turned to dead ends. Her marriage shattered under the weight of the loss. The only thing that didn't break was her memory. She could map the tiny strawberry birthmark on his left shoulder blade, the faint scar on his knee from his first clumsy step. She trained her mind like a forensic database, believing one day the data would match. She rebuilt her life around this single purpose. She became a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the best. The logic was brutal and precise. Children in critical condition flow through major hospitals. If her son was ever seriously hurt, he would come to a place like this. She followed the trail of high-profile child trafficking cases to Seoul, taking a position at Severance Hospital. She was waiting for a statistical miracle. What she didn't know was that she had moved to the epicenter of the very machine that had likely taken him. After the Korean War, South Korea was poor and war-torn. Western nations saw a source of adoptable children. The government saw a solution: reduce welfare costs, earn foreign currency, and build diplomatic goodwill. They empowered 4 private adoption agencies to handle the logistics. The demand from America and Europe was insatiable, but there was a problem. A government report from the early 1980s would later admit it plainly: there weren't enough legitimate orphans. The supply couldn't meet the demand, so the rules bent, then they broke. The agencies, like Holt Children's Services, became hunters. Social workers were paid per child delivered. In the countryside, they convinced poor families that giving up a child was a path to a better life for them, even promising the child would return one day wealthy or with a PhD. In the cities, a darker method took root. Children simply disappeared. Like the 3-year-old boy in Seoul in July of 1975. He chased a fumigation truck spraying insecticide down his street. He never came home. Decades later, he would be found living in Norway, adopted. He had been kidnapped off the pavement. This was not a rogue operation. It was systemic. A 1983 government audit cited all 4 major agencies and accused Holt of making larger-than-allowed payments to birth mothers. The practice was so aggressive that the government's own terminology turned grim. They began to refer to it internally as child trafficking. The paperwork was the perfect veil. A child listed as abandoned was the holy grail: no family to track, no consent needed. Police records from 1985 show close to 9,000 abandoned children nationwide. Yet in that same year, the number of children sent for international adoption was more than 10 times higher. Where did all those children come from? They came from fabrications. Parents were told their newborns had died, only for those Barbies to appear on adoption flights months later. Siblings were separated and given different last names. Photographs of different children were attached to the same file, creating ghost identities. By the 1980s, South Korea was the world's largest exporter of children. The pipeline was so efficient, so lucrative, it developed its own immune system. When questions were asked, ambassadors from Western countries would personally visit Korean officials, badgering them to keep the adoptions flowing, hinting that relations depended on it. The children were a commodity, and the customer was always right. This is the system Lena Adebio walked into. A system where a child could be snatched in Ghana, flown across continents, given a new name, a new history, and a price tag, all under the pristine banner of international adoption, a process called child laundering. And at the top of this food chain, facilitating the most delicate, most illegal transfers, were not just agency workers. Organized crime syndicates saw the opportunity. They handled the children that couldn't be papered over with simple lies, the kidnappings, the cross-continent transports. For them, a healthy, young child was a high-value asset, worth tens of thousands of dollars on the private adoption black market. Which brings us to the man behind the glass, Choi Min-sik, a businessman with holdings in logistics and hospitality, and according to Seoul prosecutors, a key financier for a network that specialized in sourcing difficult-to-obtain children for wealthy, impatient clients overseas. He operated in the gray space where the agency's corruption met outright criminal enterprise. Lena had seen his face before in a blurry Interpol bulletin about transnational child trafficking routes. She'd memorized it. Now he was here, in her hospital, watching her operate. He was the boy's emergency contact. The paperwork listed him as the uncle. Her mind split. The surgeon's brain continued the procedure, hands steady, monitoring the child's vital signs. The mother's brain was screaming, the birthmark, the scar, the shape of his eyelids. It was Kofi, older, paler, but hers. She had found him, and in finding him, she had walked directly into the trap. The man who stole her child was now the legal guardian who had signed the consent for surgery forms. He held all the power. If she revealed her knowledge, he could vanish with the boy the moment the surgery was over, or worse. She finished the procedure on autopilot, a miracle of surgical discipline. The boy was stable, moved to the pediatric ICU. Lena retreated to the surgeon's lounge, her hands finally trembling. She pulled up the patient file on the computer. Name, Lee Jae-hoon. Age, 6. Origin, listed as abandoned at birth, adopted domestically by Choi Min-sik 1 year ago. It was a masterpiece of fraud, but it had one flaw, a flaw only a mother would notice. The listed date of the child's adoption preceded a small, documented appendectomy scar on his abdomen, a scar Lena knew he didn't have when he was taken. The medical history was fabricated. This was her evidence. It was also her prison. To save her son's life on the table, she had to let him go back into the arms of his kidnapper. The system, the paperwork, the law, all of it was designed to protect Choi, not the child. She had one chance, the 48-hour postoperative window where the boy was too fragile to move. 48 hours to prove he was not Lee Jae-hoon, but Kofi Adebio, to prove he was stolen, and to dismantle the lie that an entire nation had spent decades perfecting. Her first move was a discreet international phone call to a contact in the Ghanaian police. Her second was to the hospital archivist, requesting old ICU admission records from a specific date. She was looking for a ghost, a child who matched Kofi's description, admitted around the time he would have arrived in Korea. The archivist returned with a file. Lena opened it, and there he was, a photo of a small, frightened boy labeled with a different Korean name, admitted for pneumonia 3 years prior. The file listed the admitting party, a social worker from the Eastern Social Welfare Society, one of the big 4 adoption agencies. The trail was real, but as she took a picture of the file with her phone, a notification flashed on the screen, a news alert. The lead prosecutor investigating the Adoption Truth Commission had just been removed from his post. The official reason was administrative restructuring. The unofficial message was clear. The system had eyes, and it was starting to fight back. The system had eyes. Lena understood this now. The removal of the prosecutor was a warning shot, not just at the Truth Commission, but at her. She was inside the machine, and the machine was starting to sense a foreign object. She had 48 hours. The clock started the moment the surgery ended. She made 2 calls from a payphone outside the hospital. The first was to her contact in Accra, who confirmed they had matched the archived photo to her missing persons report. The second was to the only person in Seoul she trusted implicitly, Park Jae-min, a nurse in the pediatric ICU. Jae-min had lost a sister to the adoption pipeline in the 80s. She knew the ghosts in the system. Together in a cramped hospital storage room, they pieced together the story the file told. The boy admitted 3 years ago as Kim Dong-hyun had been treated for pneumonia. His chart noted he was with escort from Eastern Social Welfare Society. The escort's name was logged, a Mr. Park, but next to it, in different ink, was a license plate number, hastily scribbled by an admitting nurse. Jae-min ran the plate through a friend in the motor vehicle registry. The car was registered to a shell company. That shell company was a subsidiary of a logistics firm. That logistics firm was on the board of directors of the Eastern Social Welfare Society. The circle was closed, airtight, and corrupt. This was the mechanism. The agency provided the cover, the paperwork, the story. The logistics arm, connected to men like Choi, handled the physical transfer. A child would be kidnapped or brought abroad, flown in, given a false medical episode to enter the hospital system, generating legitimate Korean medical records. Then they'd be discharged into the custody of the agency, now with a documented local identity. A clean, laundered child. Lena's son had been processed through this exact rinse cycle. His first Korean identity was Kim Dong-hyun, a sick, abandoned child. His second was Lee Jae-hoon, a domestically adopted boy. The paper trail was designed to be bulletproof. But Lena had a weapon they didn't account for: DNA. She needed a sample from the boy in the ICU to match against her own. Doing it officially would alert Choi and the hospital administration. She had to do it in the open, under the guise of medical care. During her rounds, she performed a standard post-op cheek swab for a viral panel, one swab for the lab. A second, identical swab she pocketed. It was a felony, she didn't care. She entrusted the sample to Jae-min, who had a cousin working in a private forensic lab. The cousin asked no questions. The results would take 24 hours. While they waited, Lena turned her attention to Choi Min-sik. He visited the ICU twice daily, a picture of concerned guardianship. He brought expensive toys, spoke softly to the nurses. He was performing. Lena watched him from the nurse's station, her surgeon's mask hiding her contempt. She saw the way his eyes never softened when he looked at the boy. He was checking on an asset. She began a parallel search, diving into medical journal databases and international conference attendee lists. She was looking for a specific pattern: unexplained pediatric deaths or complications following adoptions facilitated by the same agencies. She found them. A cluster of cases in Europe and the US, all children adopted from Korea through Eastern Social Welfare in the late 1990s and early 2000s, all dying from rare congenital heart defects. The odds were astronomical. Her surgical mind saw it instantly. It wasn't bad luck. It was a filter. These children had pre-existing serious conditions that made them less marketable. Were they being deliberately placed in situations where their conditions could be allowed to run their course? The thought was monstrous, but it explained the urgency of her son's surgery. Choi needed the asset fixed. Her phone buzzed. The forensic lab. The results were ready. The DNA match was 99.9% positive. The boy in the bed was her son, Kofi. The confirmation was a seismic shock that almost buckled her knees. 4 years of hopping, searching, despairing over. He was alive, he was here, and he was trapped. The legal document naming Choi as his guardian was a bar of steel across the door. She had the truth. Now she needed leverage, public leverage. She remembered a name from her research: Kim Seo-yeon, an investigative reporter who had been digging into the Adoption Truth Commission stories. Lena reached out with a cryptic email: "I am a surgeon at Severance. I have a patient whose DNA tells one story and whose paperwork tells another. The guardian is Choi Min-sik." The reporter replied within an hour: "I know that name, can you meet?" They met in a crowded, noisy coffee shop far from the hospital. Kim Seo-yeon listened, her face growing graver. She told Lena a story that changed the entire landscape. The Truth Commission wasn't just looking at past fraud. They were investigating active, ongoing operations, networks that had evolved from supplying Barbies to unwed mothers to trafficking specific, designer children for elite clients. Children of certain backgrounds, appearances, even intelligences, commanded premium prices. Choi, she said, was a pivot point. He wasn't just a gangster. He was a broker between the old, corrupt agency system and a new, global clientele. His connection to the hospital was strategic. A major hospital was the perfect place to validate a child's new identity and health status. "You have to understand," the reporter whispered, leaning in. "You're not just fighting for your son, you've punctured a very high-value pipeline. These people have politicians, judges, and police on their payroll. The prosecutor who was removed, he was looking into hospital collusion." Lena's personal mission had just exploded into a geopolitical scandal. She felt a wave of terror, followed by a colder, sharper resolve. She handed the reporter a copy of the archived file and the DNA report. "What will you do with this?" Lena asked. "Publish it," Kim said, "but the moment I do, you become a target, and they will move your son." They devised a plan. The story would go live at 6 a.m. the next morning, coinciding with the end of the 48-hour window. Lena would be in the ICU ready. The police, tipped off by the reporter's editors, would arrive simultaneously to take Choi into custody for questioning, based on the evidence in the article. It was a gamble that depended on perfect timing and public pressure, overwhelming backroom deals. Lena returned to the hospital for the night shift, a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She checked on Kofi. He was sleeping, his breath steady. She allowed herself for the first time to brush his hair with her fingers. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, this woman in a surgical cap and mask, and he didn't look away. He just stared, calm, as if recognizing something in her presence. A nurse called her name. The head of hospital administration, Dr. Kim, wanted to see her in his office immediately. The summons felt like a trapdoor opening beneath her. Dr. Kim's office was all quiet luxury. He didn't smile. "Dr. Adebio," he began, "we've received a concerning inquiry from the Eastern Social Welfare Society. They are asking about unauthorized access to historical patient records. They mentioned a specific file from 3 years ago. Do you know anything about this?" The system wasn't just fighting back. It was mounting a counter-offensive. They had tracked her inquiry to the archivist. "I was conducting research on postoperative care for pneumonia," Lena said, her voice even. The file was relevant. "I see," Dr. Kim said, his eyes cold. "The society is very protective of their ward's privacy. They've suggested your research may be misdirected. They've also expressed full confidence in Mr. Choi's guardianship of young Jae-hoon." He paused, letting the threat hang. "Your work visa is tied to this hospital, doctor. Your reputation is pristine. It would be a shame for anything to disrupt that." It was a direct threat. Expose the story, and they would bury her professionally and have her deported. They would claim she was an unstable foreigner making wild accusations. She would lose everything, including any chance to get near her son again. She left the office, her mind racing. The publication was in 8 hours. They were already onto her. Choi would be warned. He would move Kofi before dawn. She had to move first, now. She texted Jae-min a single code word they'd agreed upon. Then she walked, not ran, to the pediatric ICU. She had to get her son out of the hospital before Choi's people arrived. But the ICU was a secured unit. Cameras watched every door. Alarms would sound. She was a surgeon, not a spy. As she pushed through the double doors, she saw a figure standing by Kofi's bed. It wasn't a nurse. It was a man in a dark suit, his back to her. He was disconnecting the heart monitor leads from the boy. Choi Min-sik had decided not to wait. The man at the bed wasn't Choi. It was one of his men, and he wasn't just disconnecting the monitors. He was preparing to move the child. Lena's training took over. She didn't shout. She walked to the nursing station, picked up the phone for an internal line, and paged a code blue to that specific room. The effect was instant. A blaring alarm, the crash of footsteps as the resuscitation team sprinted down the hall. The man in the suit froze, caught in the glare of the overhead lights as nurses and a resident flooded the room. Lena stepped in behind them, all authority. "Step away from the patient, now." The man retreated, his face a mask of confusion and anger. In the chaos, Lena quickly reattached the leads, her fingers checking Kofi's pulse. Stable. The head of the ICU, Dr. Park, arrived, demanding an explanation. Lena pointed to the man. He was attempting to remove a critical post-op patient without authorization. He disconnected the monitors. Dr. Park turned to the man. "Who are you?" Before he could answer, a calm voice cut through the noise. Choi Min-sik stood at the doorway. "He is with me. I was concerned about my nephew's rest. The noise in this unit is excessive. I asked my associate to prepare him for transfer to a private suite." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Dr. Park, caught between a powerful donor and his surgeon, hesitated. Choi's eyes locked onto Lena. He knew she had forced this confrontation. "A private suite isn't medically advisable for 48 hours, per hospital protocol," Lena stated, her voice icy. "Moving him now could cause a catastrophic setback." Choi smiled, a thin, dangerous line. "Of course, we will follow the doctor's advice." He gestured for his man to leave. The crisis was defused, but the message was sent. He was making his move, and she had blocked it temporarily. Back in the sterile corridor, Choi fell into step beside her. "Dr. Adebio, a word." They walked past empty rooms, their footsteps echoing. "I know about your research, the old file, the DNA test. I even know about your journalist friend." He stopped, turning to her. "You are a remarkable woman, a brilliant surgeon. It is a waste for you to throw it all away over sentiment." Lena's blood ran cold. He knew everything. The system's eyes were his eyes. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to understand the transaction," he said. "The boy is worth a significant amount to a very specific family overseas. His placement is delicate. Your interference destroys value. For me, for the agency, for the family who has been waiting. But I am not a monster. I see your connection." He paused, letting the word connection hang in the air, a perverse acknowledgement of the truth they both knew. "Here is my offer. You will sign a statement retracting any doubts about the boy's identity. You will cease all contact with the press. In return, I will ensure you are compensated, generously, enough to start a new life, perhaps even adopt a child of your own through proper channels." The offer was so vile, so calculated, it stole her breath. He was asking her to sell her son, legally and finally, in exchange for money and silence. "And if I refuse? Then the hospital will receive a formal complaint about your unethical conduct and mental instability. Your visa will be revoked. You will be on a flight to Ghana before the week is out. And the boy will go to his new family far away, where you will never, ever find him. The choice is simple, doctor. Have a child you can never claim, or have a life." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the bright, silent hallway. The trap was complete. Every legal, institutional, and criminal lever was in his hands. Her evidence was strong, but it was on the wrong side of the power dynamic. She returned to the storage room. Jae-min was there, pale. "The police," she said. "They called the unit. They got a tip about a potential kidnapping. They're coming to question Choi, but the call didn't come from the reporter's editors. It came from inside the hospital. Someone is playing both sides." The ground shifted again. If the police were coming but were compromised, they might not arrest Choi. They might arrest her for filing a false report or for stealing DNA. The public scandal she and the reporter planned could be twisted into her own downfall. Her phone buzzed. It was Kim Seo-yeon, the reporter. "The article is ready, but my editor is holding it. He received a call from the Ministry of Justice. They're applying pressure. They're calling it a national security matter. They want it killed." Every exit was closing. The system was a living entity, flexing its muscles to protect itself. Lena felt a despair so profound it was almost peaceful. Then she looked at the photo of the 3-year-old boy in the old file, Kim Dong-hyun, Kofi, her son. He had survived kidnapping, trafficking, a heart condition, and surgery. He was a fighter. She had to be one too. She made a decision. If the system was this powerful, she had to attack its weakest link not with truth, but with its own currency, value. She asked Jae-min for one more thing, access to the hospital's internal server logs for the past week. She was looking for a pattern of accesses to Kofi's file. She found it. 2 distinct user IDs had accessed the file dozens of times outside of clinical hours. One was her own. The other belonged to a senior administrator, Dr. Kim. But there was a third, a ghost access from an external IP address that had bypassed the firewall at specific times, always coinciding with Choi's visits. She cross-referenced the times with the hospital's guest Wi-Fi logs. The external IP matched a device registered to Choi's logistics company. He wasn't just visiting, he was remotely monitoring every piece of data entered into her son's chart. He was watching her through the system. This was her leverage, not just corruption, but a criminal cyber intrusion into a hospital's protected patient data, a felony with hard digital evidence. She packaged the server logs, the IP trace, and the DNA report. She sent it not just to Kim Seo-yeon, but to 3 international news outlets, the World Health Organization, and the Ghanaian embassy, using an encrypted service. The story was now a data breach scandal with a human face. It was too big, too technical, and too international to be silenced by a phone call from the ministry. Then she walked to the hospital's legal affairs office. She didn't file a complaint. She requested, as the physician of record, an emergency ethics review of the Guardian's access to patient data, citing potential harm to the child's care. It was a bureaucratic move, slow but official. It created a paper trail inside the machine that couldn't be instantly deleted. The clock hit 5 a.m. 1 hour to publication. The ICU was quiet. Lena stood by Kofi's bed. The boy opened his eyes again. This time he didn't just look. He spoke in hesitant Korean. "Are you the doctor who fixed my heart?" Lena's own heart shattered. She nodded, unable to speak. "It doesn't hurt anymore," he said. Then he added, in a whisper, "The scary man says I'm going on a trip soon." The words were a knife. She took his hand. "You're not going anywhere, I promise." As she said it, her phone vibrated with a torrent of notifications. The article had gone live, not in one paper, but in a coordinated blast across multiple international platforms. The headline, "Data, DNA, and the Stolen Child: How a Seoul Hospital's System Enabled a Trafficking Network." The dam broke. Within minutes, the police presence at the hospital changed. Uniformed officers were replaced by plainclothes detectives from the Central Investigative Unit, the ones answering to the National Police Agency, not the local precinct. They moved straight to the ICU, not to question, but to secure. They posted an officer outside the room. Choi Min-sik arrived 10 minutes later, his calm facade finally cracked. He was met at the elevator bank by 2 detectives. She watched from down the hall as they spoke. Choi's gestures were sharp, angry. Then he looked over at her, and his expression shifted from anger to something else. Not defeat, calculation. He broke away from the detectives and walked toward her. The police didn't stop him. "You have made this very expensive," he said, his voice low. "The product is now damaged, unsaleable, but the costs must still be covered." "It's over, Choi. They have the evidence." He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Evidence of what? Data theft? Unauthorized access? I will pay a fine. My company will issue an apology. The child will be placed in a temporary foster home while the courts untangle this mess. A process that will take months, maybe years. And you, doctor, you will be a witness in a long, painful trial. Your visa will still expire. You will lose. You will only have made it more painful for yourself." He was right. The legal system was a swamp, and he had the resources to wade through it forever. She had created a scandal, but not a resolution. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and for the first time, genuine surprise flickered across his face. He answered, turning away. Lena caught only a few words. "The client, unacceptable breach of contract." When he turned back, the calculation in his eyes had crystallized into a new, desperate plan. "It seems your article has reached my buyer. They are withdrawing. They do not like publicity." He stepped closer. "This leaves me with a problem. A costly, high-maintenance problem I can no longer move. And it leaves you with an opportunity." "What opportunity?" "To take him tonight." Lena stared, disbelieving. "You're giving him to me." "Not giving, transferring liability. If the child disappears from the hospital tonight, who will they blame? The foreign doctor obsessed with him, the one who hacked the servers, the one with no legal standing. You will be the kidnapper. I will be the victim of your crusade. My hands are clean. And you will have your son, but you will be a fugitive, wanted in Korea, unable to return to Ghana. Is that the life you want for him?" It was a final, exquisite trap. To get her son, she had to become the very thing she was fighting, To save him, she had to condemn them both to a life on the run. The choice was no longer between having a child or having a life. It was between leaving him in a broken system or binding him to her own perpetual exile. The door to Act 3 swung open on a horizon darker than anything she had imagined. Lena looked at Choi, at the trap he'd built of her own desperation. To become a fugitive was to lose. She would not run. She had one move left. It wasn't to take the child. It was to surrender him to the only authority Choi couldn't bully. She turned from Choi and walked directly to the plainclothes detective stationed outside the ICU officer. "I need to report an attempted coercion and a confession." She spoke loudly, clearly, for the security cameras. "Mr. Choi Min-sik just offered to illegally transfer the minor in that room to me in exchange for my silence. He admitted the child is a product he can no longer sell due to the publicity. I believe this constitutes evidence of trafficking." Choi's face went rigid. He hadn't expected this. A public, on-the-record accusation in front of a witness from the national agency. The detective's posture changed. He looked from Lena to Choi. "Is this true, Mr. Choi?" Choi's lawyer brain engaged. "This is a ridiculous misinterpretation. I was expressing concern for the child's well-being given the doctor's unstable behavior. I suggest you review her computer accesses. She is the one obsessed with the boy." It was a stalemate of allegations, but the dynamic had shifted. Lena had forced the corruption into the light of the hallway, making it part of the official record. The detective radioed for backup and formally separated them. In the chaos, Lena's phone rang. It was the Ghanaian embassy. An attaché, his voice firm, informed her they had filed an urgent petition with the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, asserting the child's likely Ghanaian citizenship and demanding a suspension of any guardianship transfer pending a DNA verification. The international diplomatic layer was now activated. It was a slow, bureaucratic process, but it was a wall. Choi couldn't just make the boy disappear. The following 72 hours were a blur of interrogations, lawyer meetings, and tense waiting. Lena was suspended from the hospital with pay, pending an internal review, but the article was doing its work. Reporters camped outside. The story of the surgeon and the stolen child was global news. Pressure mounted. The National Police Agency, embarrassed by the allegations of local corruption, took full control of the case. They executed a search warrant on Choi's logistics company. They didn't just find evidence related to Kofi. They found a server, a digital ledger, encrypted but cracked by forensic technicians. It wasn't just a ledger of money. It was a ledger of children, coded entries spanning 8 years. Points of origin, not just Korea, but Thailand, the Philippines, Ghana, Nigeria. Destinations, the US, Canada, several European nations. Each entry had a code for the sourcing agency, a transfer fee, and a final placement fee. The adoption agencies weren't just turning a blind eye to trafficking. They were active, profitable partners in a network. Choi wasn't the mastermind. He was a regional hub. The revelation was catastrophic and massive. It triggered simultaneous investigations in a dozen countries. The Korean Truth Commission's mandate was expanded overnight. With the digital evidence, Choi's house of cards collapsed. He was arrested on charges of human trafficking, fraud, conspiracy, and corruption. His assets were frozen. The narrative flipped entirely. He was no longer a concerned uncle. He was a kingpin. In a Seoul family court, with the weight of evidence and diplomatic pressure, a judge made a provisional ruling. The child, known as Lee Jae-hoon, was to be placed in temporary emergency custody of the state due to the grave doubts about the legality of his adoption. Given the proven biological link and the absence of any other family, the court approved supervised visitation for Dr. Lena Adebio, pending a full custody hearing. The day she walked into the state care facility, not as a surgeon, but as a mother, her legs felt weak. Kofi was in a playroom. He looked up from a puzzle. A female social worker nodded to Lena. She knelt a few feet away. "Hi, Kofi," she said, in English, using his real name for the first time in his presence. He tilted his head. "That's not my name." "It was the name you were given when you were born, a long time ago. My name is Lena. I knew you then." He considered this. a serious expression on his small face. The nurse Jaimin said, "You are a very good doctor. She said you fixed my heart." "I did, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." He didn't run to her, he didn't cry, he simply picked up a piece of his puzzle and held it out to her. "Can you help? This piece is tricky." She sat beside him on the floor, and together they worked on the puzzle. It was a beginning, fragile, quiet, and real. 6 weeks later, the full custody hearing was not a battle. Choi was in detention, his rights severed. The adoption agency, Eastern Social Welfare, was under investigation and did not contest. The Korean state, acknowledging the monumental failure of its own systems, did not oppose. The judge granted Lena Adebio full legal and physical custody of her son, Kofi Adebio. Her visa was extended on humanitarian grounds, with a path to permanent residency. But the story had one final, shocking footnote. A month after the ruling, Lena was contacted by a researcher from the Truth Commission. While following the money from Choi's ledger, they had uncovered a series of shell company payments that led back to an unexpected source, a charitable foundation linked to Severance Hospital itself. The foundation had received sizable, anonymized donations from Choi's network over the years. The researcher posed a hypothesis. Was the hospital's administration not just turning a blind eye, but financially benefiting from the flow of trafficked children through its wards? Were the donations a kickback for providing the clean medical records that laundered their identities? Dr. Kim, the hospital administrator who had threatened Lena, took an indefinite leave of absence. A full forensic audit of the hospital's charitable foundation was launched. The system Lena had fought was even more embedded, more corrupt than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just outside criminals exploiting a loophole. The institution itself had been fertile ground for the poison. Lena did not return to work at Severance. She resigned. With the support of the Ghanaian embassy and several human rights organizations, she set up a small advocacy foundation with two goals: to help other parents searching for trafficked children across borders and to provide pro bono medical care to adoptees returning to Korea to search for their roots. On a Tuesday afternoon, in a small apartment overlooking the Han River, Lena cooked. The smell of onions, tomatoes, and Scotch bonnet peppers filled the kitchen. Jollof rice. Kofi sat at the table, coloring. He spoke a mix of Korean and the English she was gently teaching him. He called her Mommy Doctor. The journey was not over. There would be therapy, night terrors, language barriers, and the long shadow of loss. But there was also this: the sound of a child laughing in the next room, the certainty of his presence in the world. She had gone into that operating room to fix a heart. She had ended up exposing a system that had broken thousands. And in doing so, against impossible odds, she had found her way back to the one piece of her own heart that had been missing. The doorbell rang. It was Park Jae-min, the nurse, and Kim Seo-yeon, the reporter. They came every Tuesday now, for jollof rice, for the unspoken understanding that they had, together, held a line against a great darkness. As they sat down to eat, Lena's phone buzzed with a new email. It was from the Truth Commission. They had identified 37 other cases in the past 5 years, with irregularities matching Kofi's pattern. They were asking for her consult as both a medical professional and a victim who understood the blueprint. She read the email, then looked at her son, safe, eating at her table. She looked at her friends. The fight had ended. The work was just beginning. The work was just beginning. Lena Adebio's story is a singular victory in a sea of unresolved cases. It proves a disturbing truth. Her son's ordeal was not an anomaly, but a predictable product of a system designed for export. For decades, the world saw South Korea's adoption program as a humanitarian success. Orphan children finding loving homes abroad. The reality, as the Truth Commission has now admitted, was often a commercial transaction built on lies. The child was the product, the paperwork was the packaging, and the profit was spread across agencies, facilitators, and silent partners in institutions we trusted. Lena's fight exposed the modern iteration of this trade, but it also illuminated the ancient, aching thread that connects every one of those approximately 200,000 stories. the primal bond between parent and child, weaponized and commodified. Today, South Korea is facing its reckoning. The Truth Commission continues its work, but for many adoptees and their biological families, justice is a fragile concept. How do you repatriate a life? How do you compensate for a stolen childhood, a lost language, an erased identity? The ledger of harm has no clear column for repayment. The broader question Lena's case forces us to ask is this: how many other humanitarian pipelines in our world are operating on the same dark logic, where demand from the wealthy, bureaucratic indifference, and corporate profit intersect to create a market for human beings? Her story is not just about one mother's love. It is a blueprint of resistance. It shows that the most powerful tools against a system built on paperwork are not always more paperwork. They are memory, they are forensic attention, they are the courage to stand in a well-lit hallway and name the crime out loud. She used a surgeon's precision to cut through layers of deception, but the weapon she wielded most effectively was her refusal to accept the story she was given. She chose to believe the evidence of her own heart and the science of DNA over the official stamp on a fraudulent file. As you leave this story, remember the 3-year-old boy chasing a cloud of insecticide down a Seoul street in 1975 who found himself in Norway. Remember the parents told their newborns had died. Remember the ghosts in the ledger, the 37 new cases on Lena's screen. These are not footnotes of history, they are open wounds. Systems of power rely on our belief that they are too complex, too entrenched to challenge. Lena Adebio, a woman with a suitcase and a stethoscope, proved otherwise. She reminds us that the most dangerous force in the world is not a corrupt network. It is a focused individual who decides that the cost of looking away is finally greater than the cost of fighting back. If this story changed your perspective, then the work continues with you. Share it. Question comfortable narratives. The greatest honor we can give to the stolen and the silenced is to become better witnesses. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and as always, stay dangerous.